So there I was, Zara Kowalski, standing barely 5 feet tall in a room full of beings who could probably use me as a toothpick, and somehow I'd convinced the Galactic Research Council that I was qualified to be their xenobiologist. Yeah, I know, even I'm not sure how that happened. The research station on Kepler 442b was basically a fancy space trailer park, complete with the kind of neighbors who made you question your life choices. Take Thorax, for example. 8 feet of living granite with the personality of a concerned grandmother and biceps that could crush a small moon. He kept offering to carry my equipment because, and I quote, little Zara might hurt herself with the heavy science things. The heavy science things, by the way, were a tablet and a sample container. But sure, Thorax, my fragile human bones might spontaneously combust from the weight. Then there was Vex, who looked like someone had crossed an octopus with a philosophy professor and given the result a superiority complex. 6 tentacles, each one smarter than me apparently, and a habit of explaining things I already knew in the tone you'd use to teach a particularly slow child about finger painting. You see, Zara, Vex would say, waving a tentacle dismissively, when we encounter unknown biological specimens, we must be very careful not to contaminate them with our primitive understanding. Primitive understanding. Right, because the species that figured out faster than light travel by accident was clearly operating on caveman logic. And don't get me started on Captain Grix. Picture a 6-foot-tall flamingo who'd gone through military training and developed chronic irritable bowel syndrome. She ran the station like a drill sergeant with anger management issues, and treated me like the team mascot. Every briefing started with, "Now Zara, this might be too dangerous for humans," followed by a lecture about my adorable but impractical biology. Adorable. I was a trained scientist with 3 degrees and a specialty in xenobiology, but sure, let's focus on how adorable I was. The worst part? They meant well. They genuinely thought they were protecting me from the big scary universe. Thorax would literally pick me up and move me away from anything that looked remotely hazardous, which included automatic doors, slightly uneven flooring, and one memorable incident with a particularly aggressive houseplant. Humans are so delicate, he'd rumble in his boulder-grinding voice, like little flowers that need protection from the wind. Flowers. I was a flower. A flower with a PhD in xenobiology, and a growing desire to prove that this particular flower had thorns, but hey, who was keeping track? The thing about being constantly underestimated is that it gives you a front-row seat to just how wrong everyone can be, and trust me, they were about to find out exactly how wrong they were about their precious little human flower. The trouble started, as it usually does, with Captain Grix announcing we'd found something interesting. In my experience, when aliens say something is interesting, it's usually about 30 seconds away from trying to kill you in creative ways. Preliminary scans indicate a structure of unknown origin, she squawked, her feathers practically vibrating with excitement. Estimated age, 12,000 years. Technological signature, completely unrecognizable. Danger level, probably fine. Probably fine. Those were definitely the words you wanted to hear when venturing into ancient alien ruins on a planet that hadn't seen intelligent life since humans were still figuring out agriculture. I raised my hand. Maybe we should run more detailed scans first. Unknown technology plus unknown age usually equals unknown ways to die horribly. Thorax patted my head with one massive stone finger. Such a cautious little sprout. Do not worry, Zara. We will keep you safe from any scary ancient things. Vex rippled with what I'd learned was the tentacled equivalent of dismissive laughter. Human paranoia is so quaint. Your species sees danger everywhere because you evolved from prey animals. We, however, are civilized beings capable of rational analysis. Famous last words, right there. The structure turned out to be a massive crystalline dome that hummed with energy and made my teeth itch. The locals had definitely been avoiding this place, and now I could see why. The wildlife that usually swarmed around our research sites was nowhere to be found. Even the plants seemed to be leaning away from it. "This is definitely not a good idea," I announced, as my 3 colleagues prepared to waltz into what was obviously a death trap decorated with pretty lights. "Zara, dear," Captain Grix said in that tone that made me want to throw something. "Perhaps you should wait in the shuttle. We wouldn't want you to get frightened by any sudden noises." So naturally, I followed them inside, because apparently I was the only one who'd paid attention during the How Not to Die Stupidly in Space seminars. The moment we crossed the threshold, everything went sideways. The dome lit up like a Christmas tree having a seizure, the ground started shaking like it was auditioning for a disaster movie, and every piece of local wildlife within 50 miles suddenly decided they were very, very angry about trespassers. Our shuttle got flattened by something that looked like a rhino crossed with a bulldozer and a really bad attitude. Thorax threw himself between me and a charging beast twice the size of a city bus, taking a hit that would have turned me into human paste but left him with what appeared to be several cracked ribs and a leg that wasn't bending in the right direction. "Still think this was probably fine?" I shouted over the sound of impending doom. Nobody answered. They were too busy discovering that being civilized beings capable of rational analysis didn't actually help when ancient alien security systems decided you were unwelcome guests. So there we were, stranded on a planet that had suddenly become very interested in turning us into organic fertilizer, with our ride home currently serving as a really expensive paperweight. Thorax was down for the count, his granite hide cracked like a sidewalk after a particularly harsh winter, and the rest of my colleagues were experiencing what I like to call the oh crap moment. Captain Grix was running around in circles, literally, her bird brain apparently stuck in some kind of panic loop. "We're doomed. The shuttle is destroyed. How will we contact the station? What are we going to do?" Vex had gone completely pale, which for a purple octopus thing was actually kind of impressive. All 6 tentacles were flailing in different directions like he was trying to surrender to 6 different enemies at once. "This is unprecedented. The protocols don't cover this scenario. We need backup procedures for the backup procedures." And Thorax? Poor guy was trying to stand up on a leg that was clearly not interested in supporting 800 pounds of concerned rock monster. "Must protect little Zara," he kept muttering, even though he could barely protect himself from gravity at that point. I looked around at my panicking colleagues and realized something that should have been obvious from day one. I was the only one here who'd actually read the survival manual. You know, the one they made us study before letting us loose on alien worlds? The one that covered little details like what to do when everything goes horribly wrong? "Okay, everyone, listen up," I announced, using the voice I'd perfected for dealing with panicked undergraduates. "First, we need to get away from the structure. It's clearly some kind of automated defense system, and staying here is like camping in a missile silo." "But Zara," Captain Grix squawked, "how can you possibly know that?" "Because I'm a xenobiologist, and I actually studied the behavioral patterns of unknown alien technology instead of just assuming it would be friendly." I knelt down next to Thorax, running my hands along his injuries. "Second, we need to move Thorax, and we need to do it now. Those cracks in his carapace aren't just cosmetic. He's got internal damage." Vex rippled with what I was starting to recognize as condescending disbelief. "Zara, dear, you're not a medical professional. Perhaps you should leave the diagnosis to those of us with more experience." "Really?" I stood up, wiping rock dust off my hands. "Which one of you has experience with silicon-based physiology? Because I spent 2 years studying crystalline life forms, and I can tell you exactly what happens when their structural integrity gets compromised." The silence was deafening. Apparently none of my brilliant colleagues had bothered to actually learn about the species they were working with. "Third," I continued, pulling out my tablet and running scans of the local area, "we need to reach the emergency beacon on the ridge. It's our only way to contact the station." "But that's 15 kilometers away," Captain Grix protested. "Through hostile terrain, with predators." "With predators that I'd been studying for 6 months, while you 3 were debating the philosophical implications of their existence." I showed them the tablet screen. "They're pack hunters, but they avoid certain mineral concentrations. If we stick to the granite outcroppings, we can avoid most of them." Thorax looked up at me with something that might have been respect. "Little Zara knows the way?" "Little Zara knows a lot of things," I said, shouldering my pack, "including how to keep everyone alive long enough to get rescued. But we need to move now, before those defense systems decide to expand their perimeter." For the first time since I'd joined this crew, nobody called me adorable. They were too busy realizing that their pet human might actually be the only reason they were going to make it home alive. The real fun started when I announced my plan to get Thorax to safety. You know, the part where I'd carry 800 pounds of injured rock alien across 15 kilometers of hostile terrain. The reaction was about what you'd expect. Captain Grix made a sound like a dying helicopter. "Zara, you can't be serious. You're barely taller than his knee." "And you weigh maybe 1/10 of what he does," Vex added, all 6 tentacles wiggling with what I was pretty sure was alien laughter. "The physics simply don't work. It's mathematically impossible." Even Thorax, bless his granite heart, was trying to talk me out of it. "Little Zara should not risk herself for old Thorax. I will stay here and guard your retreat." "Like hell you will." I was already pulling equipment from my pack, laying out everything I'd need for what was either going to be the most impressive rescue in galactic history or the most embarrassing way to die on an alien planet. First rule of field biology, never leave a team member behind. Second rule, physics is just a suggestion if you're creative enough. I started with the emergency shelter material, a lightweight but incredibly strong polymer that could support about 20 times my body weight. While my colleagues watched in confusion, I cut it into strips and began weaving them into a makeshift harness system. "What are you doing?" Captain Grix asked, her head tilted at that angle that meant she was trying to process something that didn't fit her worldview. "Making a travois," I said, pulling out the collapsible support rods from our equipment kit. "Humans figured this out about 10,000 years ago. You distribute the weight across a larger surface area and use leverage to your advantage." Vex's tentacles were practically vibrating with skepticism. "Even if your primitive device works, you'll never be able to pull that much weight." "That's where you're wrong, squid boy." I finished attaching the harness to the travois frame, then began the delicate process of getting Thorax onto it. "See, you've all been thinking about this wrong. You're assuming I need to be stronger than Thorax. I don't. I just need to be more persistent." Getting an 800-pound rock alien onto an improvised stretcher while he kept insisting he was fine was like trying to convince a mountain to relocate for better lighting. But eventually, with a lot of creative engineering and some truly spectacular cursing in 3 languages, I had Thorax secured and ready to move. "This is insane," Captain Grix muttered as I adjusted the harness across my shoulders and hips. "You're going to kill yourself trying to drag him up that first hill." "Watch and learn, Featherbrain." I leaned into the harness, feeling the weight settle across my back and legs. It was heavy, sure, but the beauty of a well-designed travois is that you're not actually lifting the weight, you're redistributing it. The frame did most of the work, and I just had to provide the forward momentum. The first step was the hardest. 800 pounds of alien doesn't want to start moving, and for a moment I thought my brilliant plan was going to end with me face first in the dirt. But then physics kicked in. The travois started sliding, and suddenly, we were moving. "Impossible," Vex whispered, all 6 tentacles frozen in shock. "Nope," I grunted, settling into a steady rhythm. "Just human." The real trick wasn't the initial pull, it was maintaining momentum. Stop moving and you'd never get started again. So I kept walking, 1 foot in front of the other, while my colleagues scrambled to keep up. The harness distributed the weight across my entire body, turning what should have been an impossible deadlift into something more like a really intense hiking workout. "How is she doing that?" Captain Griggs panted, already starting to fall behind. "Human endurance," Thorax rumbled from his position on the travois. "I have read about this. Humans are persistence hunters. They do not need to be fastest or strongest. They just never stop." "That's ridiculous," Vex protested, though he was starting to sound winded. "No species can just keep going indefinitely." "Tell that to the marathon runners," I called back, not breaking stride. "Or the persistence hunters who used to chase down prey by literally running them to death. We're not built for speed, people. We're built for the long haul." By the time we reached the first ridge, I was warmed up and hitting my stride. Behind me, my alien colleagues were discovering that their superior physiology wasn't quite as superior as they'd thought when it came to sustained effort. But me? I was just getting started. "This is only the beginning," I announced, pausing long enough to check Thorax's condition and adjust the harness. "We've got 14 kilometers to go." The look on their faces was absolutely priceless. For the first time in months, I wasn't the one struggling to keep up. The real test came about 5 kilometers in, when we hit what I like to call the terrain from hell section of our journey. Picture an obstacle course designed by someone who really hated legs, featuring loose rock, sudden elevation changes, and the kind of thorny vegetation that seemed personally offended by the existence of skin. "We should rest," Captain Grix gasped, her usually pristine feathers now looking like she'd been through a blender. "My legs are cramping." "Rest is death," I replied, not even breathing hard yet. "Those defense systems are still expanding their search pattern. We stop moving, we become very expensive alien jerky." The beauty of the travois design really showed itself here. While my colleagues were struggling with the uneven terrain, slipping and sliding on loose stones, I had 800 pounds of ballast keeping me stable. Thorax weight actually helped, giving me traction and momentum that kept me moving forward even when the ground tried to betray me. "This is impossible," Vex wheezed, his tentacles now dragging in the dirt. "No biological system can maintain this energy output indefinitely." "That's where you're wrong, Calamari." I navigated around a particularly nasty patch of razor-sharp crystal formations, the travois gliding smoothly behind me. Human bodies are basically cheating when it comes to endurance. We've got this thing called the phosphocreatine system, then glycolysis kicks in, and eventually we switch to oxidative metabolism. It's like having 3 different fuel tanks. "I don't understand," Captain Grix admitted. now walking with the distinctive waddle of someone whose legs had declared independence from their brain. "We're literally built for this," I explained, hopping over a fallen log that would have been a major obstacle if I'd been trying to lift Thorax instead of drag him. "Humans used to hunt by just following animals until they collapsed from exhaustion. We're not fast, we're not strong, but we're absolutely relentless." That's when the local wildlife decided to make things interesting. A pack of what looked like six-legged wolves crossed with industrial blenders emerged from the crystalline forest, their eyes glowing with that special kind of hunger that meant they'd decided we looked like dinner. "Predators!" Captain Griggs shrieked, immediately going into her panic flight response. "Yep," I said calmly, adjusting my grip on the travois harness. "Right on schedule." The lead predator, a magnificent beast that probably weighed 3 times what I did, approached with the confident swagger of something that had never met a creature it couldn't eat. It looked at me, looked at the 800 pounds of alien I was dragging, and you could practically see the calculations running through its predator brain. "Zara," Thorax rumbled quietly, "you should leave me and run." "Not happening, big guy." I reached into my pack and pulled out a handful of the mineral samples I'd been collecting. "These beauties are territorial, but they're also smart. They don't waste energy on prey that isn't worth the effort." I threw the first sample, a chunk of crystallized sulfur compound, right at the lead predator's feet. The reaction was immediate and spectacular. The beast recoiled like I'd thrown acid, snarling and backing away from the chemical scent. "Fascinating," Vex managed to gasp. "How did you know?" "Because I actually studied them instead of just cataloging them," I said, throwing more samples to create a chemical barrier around our group. "They're silicon-based, which means certain sulfur compounds are toxic to them. It's like pepper spray for rock wolves." The pack circled us for a few more minutes, testing the chemical barrier, but eventually decided we weren't worth the risk. They melted back into the crystal forest, leaving us alone, with the sound of my colleagues' labored breathing. "That was incredible," Captain Griggs said, staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "That was Tuesday," I replied, checking Thorax's condition before resuming our march. "We've got 10 kilometers to go." The next few hours were a masterclass in human endurance versus alien physiology. One by one, my colleagues began to fade. Vex's tentacles started cramping so badly he had to stop every few hundred meters. Captain Griggs developed a limp that got progressively worse until she was barely hobbling. Even their superior alien biology couldn't compete with millions of years of human evolution that had optimized us for one thing: never giving up. "How are you still going?" Vex asked during one of their increasingly frequent rest stops. "You're carrying more weight than the rest of us combined." "Because humans are basically the universe's most stubborn species," I said, stretching my back and checking our progress. "When our ancestors were living in caves, they figured out that being persistent was more valuable than being powerful. We're not built to win the sprint, we're built to win the marathon." "But surely you must be tired," Captain Griggs protested. "You've been carrying Thorax for 8 hours straight." "Tired, sure, but not done." I adjusted the harness and prepared to resume our journey. The thing about human endurance is that it's not just physical. We've got this stubborn streak that kicks in when things get impossible. The worse the situation gets, the more determined we become. Thorax looked up at me from his position on the travois, his rock-hard features showing something that might have been awe. "Little Zara is not so little after all. Little Zara's about to carry your rocky butt all the way to that beacon," I said, leaning into the harness. "Because that's what humans do. We don't quit, we don't give up, and we definitely don't leave anyone behind." As we crested the final ridge, the emergency beacon visible in the distance, I could hear my colleagues struggling to keep up behind me. For the first time in our working relationship, I was the one setting the pace, and they were the ones trying desperately not to get left behind. Turns out the universe's most fragile species was also its most persistent. Who would have thought? The emergency beacon sat on top of a ridge that looked like it had been designed by someone who really enjoyed making people suffer for their rescue. Steep, rocky, and covered in the kind of loose scree that turned every step into a potential avalanche. My alien colleagues took one look at it and you could practically hear their spirits breaking. "I can't," Captain Griggs wheezed, collapsing onto a convenient boulder. "My legs have filed for divorce from my body. They're not speaking to me anymore." Vex had given up all pretense of dignity and was now dragging himself along the ground like a very disappointed octopus. "This is it. This is how I die. Exhausted on an alien planet because I followed a human on a death march." "Death march?" I looked back at them, genuinely confused. "We're almost there. This is like the final sprint." "Sprint?" Captain Grix made a sound like air escaping from a punctured balloon. You've been pulling 800 pounds of alien across 15 kilometers of hostile terrain for 12 hours straight. How is any of this a sprint? Because the hard part is over, I said, starting up the final slope. We made it past the predators, through the crystal forest, around the sulfur geysers, and nobody died. This is just walking uphill. Just walking uphill, Thorax repeated from his position on the travois, and I swear I could hear amusement in his gravelly voice. Little Zara makes it sound so simple. It is simple, I replied, leaning into the harness as we climbed. 1 foot in front of the other. Repeat until you reach your destination. Humans have been doing this for millennia. The final ascent was brutal, but not in the way my colleagues thought. The real challenge wasn't the physical effort. It was watching 3 superior alien beings discover that their advanced evolution hadn't prepared them for the simple, grinding persistence that humans had perfected. They crawled up that slope like broken toys, while I maintained the same steady pace I'd been using all day. There, I announced, cresting the ridge. Emergency beacon. Time to call for a ride home. The beacon was a standard Galactic Research Council emergency transmitter, about the size of a small building and designed to punch a signal through pretty much anything short of a black hole. I activated it with hands that were steady despite 12 hours of continuous exertion, while my colleagues collapsed in various stages of exhaustion behind me. This is Research Station Kepler 442b, responding to emergency beacon activation, came the voice through the comm system. Please identify yourselves and state the nature of your emergency. This is xenobiologist Zara Kowalski with the Geological Survey Team, I replied, checking Thorax's condition while I talked. We have 1 team member with significant injuries, requiring immediate medical attention, and we need emergency extraction from grid reference 77 Alpha. Understood. Medical transport is en route. Estimated arrival time 45 minutes. I turned to find my 3 colleagues staring at me with expressions I'd never seen before. No condescension, no patronizing smiles, no head pats. Just pure, unadulterated amazement. You did it, Captain Grix whispered. You actually did it. We did it, I corrected, settling down next to Thorax to monitor his condition. Team effort. Team effort. Vex's tentacles were twitching with what I was learning to recognize as alien laughter. Zara, you carried an 800-pound alien across 15 kilometers of hostile terrain, while the rest of us could barely carry ourselves. And you provided excellent moral support, I said diplomatically. Very motivational groaning. Thorax reached up with one massive hand and very gently patted my shoulder. Little Zara is not little. Little Zara is mighty. Little Zara, I said, is a human, and humans don't quit. The rescue shuttle arrived exactly 45 minutes later, piloted by another research team who took one look at our situation and immediately started asking questions. The medical team rushed to Thorax, while the pilot cornered me for a report. Let me get this straight, she said, reviewing the data from my tablet. You carried a Class 5 geological being across 15 kilometers of hazardous terrain, through active predator territory, while maintaining a pace that exhausted 3 other team members? That's about the size of it, I admitted. And you're not even breathing hard. Humans are built for endurance, I explained for what felt like the 100th time that day. We're persistence hunters. This is what we do. The pilot, a Centaurian with the kind of expression that suggested she was recalculating everything she knew about human biology, shook her head slowly. The Council is going to want a full report on this. Human endurance capabilities may have been significantly underestimated. You think? I looked back at my colleagues, who were being loaded onto the shuttle with the kind of care usually reserved for broken antiques. Maybe next time someone suggests that humans are too fragile for dangerous missions, you could mention that we're also too stubborn to know when to quit. As the shuttle lifted off, I caught Thorax's eye. He was strapped to a medical gurney, his injuries being tended by the best alien medics in the sector, but he was smiling that rocky smile of his. Thank you, mighty Zara, he said quietly, for not leaving this old stone behind. Thank you, Thorax, I replied, for finally figuring out that this little flower has thorns. The flight back to the station was quiet except for the hum of the engines and the occasional groan from my exhausted colleagues. I spent most of it staring out the window at the terrain we'd just crossed, thinking about persistence and endurance and the peculiar way humans had evolved to never, ever give up. When we docked, there was a crowd waiting. Word had apparently gotten out about the human who'd carried an alien twice her size across a hostile planet, and suddenly everyone wanted to know how I'd done it. Simple, I told them. stepping off the shuttle with the same steady stride I'd maintained all day. I'm human, we don't know when to quit. And for the first time since joining the Galactic Research Council, nobody called me adorable. They were too busy being impressed by what this particular human could do when the situation called for it. Turns out the universe's most fragile species was also its most stubborn. Who would have thought?